Hi everybody, it's Jennifer. I'm back with class number 10 for Readings and Culture, here to wrap everything up in a neat little package for our final class of the semester. So we have been discussing different mythologies of the world throughout the semester, specifically Greek mythology, Norse mythology, and Babylonian mythology. We've talked a little bit about how these mythologies are related to modern day culture. Today we'll talk more about that in a global way and also talk about the ways in which these mythologies also influence our personal cultures. So in order to do this, today we are going to begin by looking at something called the Monomyth, or the hero's journey. This is a theory or a concept which was really first coined by an American scholar named Joseph Campbell in the early 1900s. Well, he was born in the early 1900s. His theories came into being more in the mid-1900s. And basically, he studied world mythologies and came up with a lot of theories about how similar mythology was, what differences there were. He talked about the reasons that different cultures wrote myths. And eventually, he came to this idea of the hero's journey, or the monomyth, which purports that no matter which culture we're talking about, every mythology has stories of heroes. And those stories follow a very similar pattern and very identifiable stages in each of these journeys in which a hero goes from challenging him or herself, but usually himself, to go beyond his or her comfort level, the different stages that he or she will pass through on this journey, and then the final resolution. And Campbell identified 17 different stages in the monomyth, or the hero's journey, that he said you could recognize no matter which mythology you were reading, whether it be ancient mythology or whether it be a story from the 20th century. So we're going to take a look at his theory a little bit more closely. And then we are also going to look at a hero story that we haven't covered in this class yet and see how they line up. So let's begin with that hero. Greek mythology, we're going back to the beginning here, and we're going to talk about the 12 labors of Hercules. Hercules is really the classic hero, and when we talk about heroes in mythology, he's the one that most people will most regularly cite. Last week, we talked about the Epic of Gilgamesh, and we saw the heroes, both Gilgamesh and his partner Enkidu, and we saw their trials and tribulations as they went on their own hero's journey. And now we're going to look at the hero's journey of Hercules. In the PowerPoint, I've actually provided you with the text of the Labors of Hercules, which I think is a pretty good one. It's a good concise overview with some useful language tips in it as well. So I am going to post this PowerPoint separate from this YouTube video, and I ask that at this point you pause and you look at the PowerPoint and please read the story of Hercules so you understand the myth before we go any further. Okay, at this point, I am actually just going to scroll through the version of the Labors of Hercules that I have provided for you here. Please do take the time to read this carefully. It will become really useful when we talk about the hero's journey a little bit later. So as you go through, please note on the last page, there's a glossary on the right side here, which has some great definitions of some of the probably less familiar English words that are in here. And then on the very last page, I have provided a graphic novel version, which is a lot of fun. I recommend you check this out, particularly if you love graphic novels. So read the story first, then check out the graphic novel, and it will all come clear. Okay, let's go back to the version. Okay, so once you have read that, then it's time to really talk about Joseph Campbell and his power of myth and his theory of the hero's journey. So as I said to you before, he is a comparative mythology scholar who gives us this idea of the hero's journey And I will let you read this quote on your own, but I do want to point out, starting right about here where my cursor is, as an allegorical symbol for every person, the hero experiences the quest in the structure of a cycle with certain characteristics. So he's telling us that there's a cycle with common characteristics. Campbell delineates this cycle in The Hero with 1,000 Faces. That's his book. The standard path of the mythological adventure of the hero is a magnification of the formula represented in the rites of passage, separation, initiation, return, which might be named the nuclear unit of the monomyth. So Campbell shows us that the hero's journey is a cyclical journey that's divided into 3 parts: separation, initiation, and return. And then Campbell goes on to divide those 3 parts into 17 parts total of identifiable stages on the hero's journey. This is the most basic understanding of the cycle that Campbell presents. The hero is called to venture forth into the unknown, and she may even be reluctant to do so. Supernatural representation interacts with the hero, and the hero wins a decisive battle and imbibes precious qualities through which she may bestow boons upon her people. There's a little irony that he chooses the pronoun she here, because in most cases in mythology, the hero is actually a male. But here we have a presentation of the idea that the hero's myth, the hero's journey, or the monomyth, involves 3 distinct stages made up of 17 different steps, which can be traced similarly through mythology around the world. And we see that each of these heroes' journeys follows a similar pattern. Now you can see here there's a crash course video for you to watch, so please pause the PowerPoint here or pause the video here and go to the PowerPoint and watch this 13-minute video by our friend. It's an excellent overview of the monomyth, and it will help going forward. So take a minute here. Thanks. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that crash course video. Once again, it's fast, but it does provide a great overview of the 17 steps involved in Joseph Campbell's model of the monomyth, or the hero's journey. And this graphic that you see here does the same. So it gives you a brief description of each of the steps along the way. I've also provided a link to the right, which I will click on to show you. If you love mythology, please read this whole article. It's very interesting. For the basics of the monomyth, I recommend that you read pages 6 through 10, which I will scroll to now, just so you can see what I'm talking about. This is where you will find a clear outline of the 17 stages in actually really straightforward language. So beginning here, in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, Campbell delineates the stages of the hero's journey that the monomyth comprises of. His 17-stage framework is broadly divided into 3 stages: separation, initiation, and return. And here we go. And it gives you all 17 stages over the next 4 pages. So I recommend that you take a look at that, and it will be really helpful. Okay. On the following page of the PowerPoint, you're going to find a much simpler version of this monomyth cycle. Oftentimes, scholars will break this down into only 12 steps. It makes it a little bit easier to understand, and you can see a much cleaner graphic on this page, so you can follow along there as well. Okay. And then this is where we want to go, is we are talking about the hero's journey and the commonalities between mythologies across the world. So we can see heroes in Greek mythology, Norse mythology, Babylonian mythology, and mythologies from many other places in the world who follow a similar trajectory as they complete challenges for internal transformation as well as external battles that they are facing. It's a common theme. So the first thing we're attempting to do in this class is to compare and contrast mythologies across cultures. The next thing we want to be able to do is to look at those mythologies and figure out how they have influenced modern culture. So where do we see this same hero story turn up in present day culture? This is a universal theme, and it shows up over and over again. If you can think of any story in your reading that you have read recently, whether it's modern literature, whether it's literature from the 19th century, whether it's a comic book, or think too about films, the storyline of a hero, and think about how you can see these same patterns in each of those storylines. So I am not going to give you examples of that because that's something I'm going to be asking you to do. However, this slide right here, this link, From Mythology to Masculinity, How the Hero's Journey Can Help You Become a Better Man, read this article. It talks about various examples from modern day of each stage of the hero's journey. So I think it will be enlightening for you, whether or not you have read or seen all of these modern media or modern literature pieces. Doesn't matter. It will give you a good idea of some examples. And then the other thing this does is it brings me to the third point, which is after we compare mythologies, talk about mythology in modern culture, we want to talk about how mythology relates to you personally. And can you see the hero's journey in your own world? That's where we want to bring it all together. So we go to the final slide. Oh, not quite the final slide. Got two more. This is Joseph Campbell, by the way, with some words of wisdom for you. Heroes sum up what a whole culture wants to say and are essentially one of us, possessing our strengths and weaknesses. What myth teaches, then, is about one's self as part of the being of the world. The hero is a sign that points past itself toward a foundation of being, that is one with the consciousness of the beholder. With these attributes in mind, the monomyth of the hero begins to come into view as a perennial story with incarnations spanning centuries of human existence. Basically, Joseph Campbell is saying is the hero story is a story of a hero, but it's also the story of us all. We all have a hero's story. And now your job is going to be to take mythology, relate it to not only culture, modern day pop culture, but also to your own personal life. So let's move on to the last slide. Making connections. This is what I'm going to be asking you to do on the final exam. Here's a practice for you. You are going to be looking at three different things. Myth to myth connections. Can you compare and contrast world mythologies? Could you take Hercules and Gilgamesh and talk about how the hero's journey plays out in both of those? Secondly, myth to modern culture. Can you show me examples of the hero's journey in modern culture? And finally, myth to personal experience. Can you relate this myth to something in your own life? Here's my suggestion. Practice for the final exam. You will get a question very similar to this on the final. It will not be the hero's journey, but this is a great example of what you'll need to do. You'll first need to consider myth-to-myth relationships. So first, consider Campbell's concept of the monomyth. Demonstrate how one myth we've learned about in this class provides an example of a hero's journey. Show how your chosen hero meets at least 3 criteria of Campbell's 17-stage framework. Provide specific details that support your claim. Part 1. Part 2. Provide an example of monomyth in modern storytelling. Give an example from modern literature or media that recounts a modern-day hero's journey. Provide at least 3 examples of the stages of your chosen hero's journey in this modern context. And then Part 3, relate the monomyth concept to a personal challenge that you've overcome in your own life. Recount your journey and give at least 3 examples of the identified stages of your hero's journey. So I'm going to be asking you to do all 3 things. Relate myth to myth, relate myth to modern culture, and then relate myth to your own personal story. So practice. Next week when I do an exam review, I'm going to provide a sample response for each of these 3 parts so you can see what it is I'll be looking for. Pay special attention to provide specific details that support your claim in each of these. So make sure you spend some time thinking about those details. That, my friends, wraps it up. So please feel free to message me at any point over the next week with questions about the hero's journey. I'll be back online again next week to visit you with a final exam review. And once again, I'm always here for questions. So take care, enjoy the monomyth, and I'll see you online again soon. Bye.